Echoes from the Grave. Declan Hayes was a passionate history professor at a local university in Williamsburg, Virginia. Known for his captivating lectures and deep love for colonial America, he had a knack for bringing the past to life. His office was a testament to his dedication, filled with old maps, rare books, and artifacts from bygone eras. Declan's enthusiasm was contagious, inspiring countless students to pursue their own journeys into history. Recently, Declan had embarked on a new research project that delved into the lesser-known aspects of colonial life. His focus was on uncovering the personal stories and hidden secrets that traditional history books often overlooked. This quest for knowledge led him to explore various historical sites around Williamsburg, searching for clues that could provide a deeper understanding of the daily lives and struggles of early American settlers. One crisp autumn afternoon, armed with his trusty notebook and camera, Declan set out on what he thought would be another routine exploration. Little did he know, this particular journey would lead him to an eerie, overgrown graveyard and unravel a chilling mystery that had been buried for centuries. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape, Declan wandered through the outskirts of Williamsburg. The crisp autumn air was filled with the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. His exploration led him to a neglected path, barely visible through the dense underbrush. Intrigued, Declan pushed forward, guided by an inexplicable pull. After a few minutes of navigating through the tangled vines and gnarled roots, he stumbled upon an overgrown, forgotten graveyard. The site was hauntingly beautiful, with ancient, moss-covered headstones jutting out from the ground at odd angles. Weeds and ivy had claimed the once sacred ground, creating an eerie, otherworldly atmosphere. Declan's heart quickened as he carefully examined the weathered tombstones. His eyes were drawn to one in particular, partially obscured by creeping ivy. He brushed away the foliage to reveal an old, cracked headstone. The epitaph was unusual and unsettling. "Here lies Terry Wiley, who was buried alive. May she rest in peace, or haunt those who disturb her slumber." A chill ran down Declan's spine, but his curiosity was piqued. The macabre inscription hinted at a dark and tragic story, and he couldn't resist the urge to uncover more. This discovery was unlike anything he had encountered before, igniting a morbid fascination and a determination to uncover the truth behind Terry Wiley's grave. Despite an overwhelming sense of dread gnawing at the edges of his mind, Declan found himself unable to walk away from the graveyard. The eerie epitaph echoed in his thoughts, compelling him to dig deeper into the mystery of Terry Wiley. As night fell, casting the graveyard into darkness, he retrieved a small shovel from his car, his hands trembling with both anticipation and fear. With each shovelful of earth he removed, the weight of his actions pressed heavier on his conscience. The sound of the shovel slicing through the soil seemed deafening in the silent night. Sweat trickled down his brow despite the cool air, and his breath came in shallow gasps. After what felt like hours, the dull thud of metal against wood signaled that he had reached the coffin. Heart pounding, Declan cleared the remaining dirt from the coffin's lid. He hesitated, a sense of foreboding washing over him, but his curiosity overpowered his fear. With a deep breath, he pried open the creaky lid. The sight that greeted him was more horrifying than he could have imagined. Inside the coffin lay a skeleton, its bones twisted in a grotesque manner. The most chilling detail, however, were the claw marks etched into the inside of the lid, evidence of a desperate struggle for escape. Declan's stomach churned, and he stumbled back, almost dropping the flashlight he held. The realization that Terry Wiley had been buried alive sent a cold shiver down his spine. He had unearthed a terrible truth, and the air around him seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. as if the graveyard itself were alive and aware of his intrusion. As Declan staggered away from the open grave, a profound sense of unease settled over him. The horror of what he had uncovered clung to his thoughts, invading his dreams and turning his waking hours into a blur of anxiety. The whispers started subtly at first, soft murmurs that he dismissed as tricks of his imagination. But soon, they grew louder, desperate pleas that seemed to come from every shadowed corner of his home. Claustrophobic episodes began to plague him, an irrational fear of being trapped closing in whenever he was in confined spaces. The once comforting walls of his study now felt like a prison. Desperate for answers, Declan pored over historical texts and local legends, hoping to find a way to appease the restless spirit he had disturbed. His research led him to an obscure account of a curse linked to the Wiley family, a curse that doomed those who desecrated their graves to a fate worse than death. Panic tightened its grip on Declan as he realized the gravity of his situation. The whispers grew more insistent, the claustrophobia more unbearable. His frantic attempts to break the curse only seemed to strengthen its hold. It wasn't long before he understood the truth. He had awakened a malevolent force that would not rest until he suffered the same fate as Terry Wiley. One night, as the whispers reached a fever pitch, Declan found himself compelled to return to the graveyard. The spirit had taken control, his body no longer his own. With trembling hands, he picked up the shovel, the final act of his grim discovery unfolding with a chilling inevitability. The possession took hold of Declan with a malevolent force, his movements no longer his own. He moved in a trance-like state, driven by an unseen power that commanded his every action. His mind screamed in protest, but his body betrayed him, mechanically picking up the shovel and walking to an untouched patch of ground near Terry Wiley's grave. With each thrust of the shovel into the cold earth, Declan's internal struggle intensified. He fought to regain control, his mind a whirlwind of fear and desperation. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, echoing Sarah's final, frantic pleas for mercy. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the dirt that smeared his skin. His breaths came in ragged gasps, the weight of the curse pressing down on him like an iron shroud. As the hole deepened, Declan's resistance waned. The spirit's hold was too strong, its malevolence too overpowering. He dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face, the last remnants of his willpower shattered. With a final, defeated breath, he climbed into the grave, the whispers now a deafening cacophony in his ears. The dirt closed in around him, each shovelful sealing his fate. Declan lay in the coffin, the darkness absolute, the air heavy with the scent of earth and decay. The walls of the coffin felt suffocatingly close, the same claw marks etched into the wood a grim reminder of his doomed predecessor. The whispers continued, a relentless, torturous litany, filling his mind with Sarah's anguish. As the last bit of light vanished and the silence enveloped him, Declan realized with chilling clarity that he was trapped. The horror of his situation settled over him, the echoes of Terry Wiley's final moments his only companion. In the darkness, he understood the full extent of the curse he had unleashed, destined to starve and suffocate in the cold earth, just as she had. The confined horror. Valentina Rossi was known throughout Ravenna, Italy, as a masterful art restorer. Her delicate hands and keen eye for detail had breathed new life into countless historical pieces, preserving the rich cultural heritage of her beloved city. Living in a quaint apartment adorned with sketches and miniature replicas of famous artworks, Valentina's world was a blend of the ancient and the modern. Her days were spent meticulously cleaning, repairing, and restoring priceless artifacts, each piece telling a story that fascinated her deeply. Valentina's latest assignment was her most challenging yet. The renovation of a centuries-old chapel that had long been closed to the public. The chapel, tucked away in a forgotten corner of Ravenna, was renowned for its exquisite frescoes and intricate mosaics, now faded and damaged by time. This project was a dream come true for Valentina, offering her the chance to restore and preserve a piece of history that had been hidden for generations. The initial survey of the chapel revealed layers of grime and neglect, but Valentina saw beyond the decay. She envisioned the vibrant colors and intricate details that once adorned the walls. Her passion for historical restoration drove her to painstakingly document every inch of the chapel, planning each step of the renovation with meticulous care. As she began her work, her excitement grew, each brushstroke and careful repair bringing the chapel's former glory a little closer to reality. Little did she know, the chapel held dark secrets that were about to unfold, secrets that would turn her dream project into a living nightmare. Valentina immersed herself in the chapel's renovation, her days filled with the scent of aged stone and the sound of her tools gently scraping away centuries of grime. Each brushstroke revealed vibrant hues beneath layers of dust, and each repaired mosaic tile restored a piece of the chapel's lost splendor. The frescoes, depicting scenes of saints and angels, slowly emerged in their former glory, their ethereal beauty a testament to the craftsmanship of long-forgotten artists. One afternoon, while working on a section of the chapel floor, Valentina noticed an unusual pattern in the worn tiles. Her keen eye for detail led her to investigate further, and with a gentle but firm effort, she pried up one of the tiles. To her astonishment, beneath it lay a rusted iron ring. With growing curiosity, she tugged at the ring, revealing a hidden trapdoor that creaked open to reveal a set of ancient stone steps descending into darkness. Heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement, Valentina descended into the crypt, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the damp walls. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. As she reached the bottom, the beam of her flashlight fell upon a chilling sight. Skeletal remains, twisted and contorted, with fingernail marks etched into the stone walls. These were the remains of people who had been buried alive, their final moments of terror immortalized in the clawed stone. Valentina's mind raced with questions. Who were these unfortunate souls? What had led to their tragic fate? Despite her shock, a morbid curiosity took hold. She knew this crypt held a dark chapter of history that had long been forgotten, and she was determined to uncover its secrets, even as a deep sense of dread began to settle in the pit of her stomach. After uncovering the hidden crypt, Valentina's nights became plagued with haunting visions. As she lay in bed, her mind drifted into a restless sleep, only to be transported back to the crypt. She saw the victims in their final moments, their eyes wide with terror, their screams silent but piercing. Their ghostly hands reached out, clawing at the stone, their faces twisted in despair. The visions were so vivid that Valentina could feel their desperation, the suffocating fear as the darkness closed in around them. These nightmares began to bleed into her waking hours. During her work in the chapel, she would catch glimpses of ghostly figures out of the corner of her eye, shadows that vanished when she turned her head. The once comforting atmosphere of the chapel now felt oppressive and sinister. The air seemed colder, the silence more profound, broken only by the occasional, inexplicable whisper. Strange accidents soon followed. Tools that were securely placed would fall, narrowly missing her. A scaffold she was working on collapsed without warning, leaving her shaken but miraculously unharmed. The electrical system, which had been stable for years, began to short-circuit, causing lights to flicker ominously. One evening, she returned home to find her apartment in disarray, though nothing had been stolen. It was as if an unseen force was tormenting her, making her life increasingly chaotic and dangerous. Valentina's fear and confusion grew with each incident. She tried to rationalize the events, attributing them to stress and overwork, but the logical explanations no longer seemed sufficient. The haunting visions and accidents were too precise, too malevolent to be mere coincidences. As the boundary between reality and the supernatural blurred, Valentina realized that uncovering the crypt had awakened something ancient and vengeful, and it was coming for her. Desperate to understand the malevolent forces tormenting her, Valentina plunged into frantic research about the chapel and its crypt. She combed through old records, manuscripts, and local legends, searching for any clues that could explain the haunting. Late nights at the library and hours spent poring over dusty archives began to yield pieces of a dark and twisted history. Valentina discovered that the chapel had been built during a period of intense turmoil and superstition. According to old documents, a group of villagers had been falsely accused of witchcraft and heresy. They were brutally executed and buried alive as a warning to others. Among the crypt's builders was an architect who had betrayed them, ensuring their horrific fate in exchange for wealth and power. As she delved deeper, Valentina was horrified to uncover evidence that suggested she was the reincarnation of that very architect, doomed to face the wrath of the spirits she had wronged in her past life. The tension in Valentina's life escalated as the hauntings grew more intense. The spirit's whispers became a constant presence, echoing in her mind, accusing her of her past sins. The visions of the victim's final moments became more frequent and vivid, invading her thoughts even during the day. Objects around her moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and eerie cold spots followed her everywhere. Consumed by guilt and fear, Valentina struggled to understand her connection to the victims and how she could atone for her past life's betrayal. She sought advice from historians, spiritualists, and even local priests, but no one could provide the answers she needed. The spirit's vengeance was relentless, driving her to the brink of madness. She realized that to find peace, she had to confront the horrors of her past life and seek forgiveness from those she had wronged. As Valentina's research led her deeper into the dark history of the chapel, the spirit's vengeance reached its climax. One night, while working late in the chapel, she felt an icy grip tighten around her. The whispers grew louder, now deafening, and the temperature plummeted. Valentina tried to flee, but her body moved against her will, compelled by an unseen force towards the crypt. With terror-stricken eyes, she watched as the hidden trapdoor reopened, revealing the dark stairway below. The spirit's wrath propelled her down the steps, her flashlight flickering ominously as she descended into the abyss. The crypt's air was suffocating, and her breath came in shallow gasps. She struggled against the invisible hands pushing her forward, but her efforts were futile. As she reached the bottom, the spirit's power forced her into the ancient chamber. The trapdoor slammed shut above her, sealing her inside. Valentina clawed at the walls, mirroring the desperate actions of the victims she had seen in her visions. Panic surged through her veins as the realization of her fate set in. The cold stone walls closed in, and the darkness became impenetrable. In her final moments, Valentina's mind was consumed by the same terror and despair that had haunted the victims of her past life's betrayal. She felt their pain, their hopelessness, as if it were her own. The whispers turned into agonized screams, and she could hear the relentless scratching of nails against stone, echoing her own frantic attempts to escape. The air grew thinner, and her strength waned. Valentina's screams faded into silence as she succumbed to the spirit's retribution. The crypt's darkness enveloped her completely, and in her last breath, she understood the full weight of her past sins. Her fate was sealed, trapped in the same cycle of horror and despair she had once inflicted upon others. forever confined within the crypt's cold embrace. Voices from the depths. Rachel Thompson was a determined and empathetic paranormal investigator based in Charleston, South Carolina. Known for her keen intuition and unwavering dedication, she had built a reputation for delving into the darkest corners of haunted sites, bringing closure to the restless spirits she encountered. Her cozy apartment was filled with an eclectic mix of ghost hunting equipment, historical texts, and mementos from her numerous investigations, reflecting her passion for uncovering the truth behind supernatural phenomena. Rachel's latest case drew her to a local plantation steeped in tragic history and eerie legends. Rumors had circulated for generations about the restless spirits of slaves who had been buried alive on the plantation grounds. These stories spoke of ghostly pleas for help and chilling encounters with shadowy figures. Intrigued and driven by a deep sense of justice for the wronged, Rachel felt compelled to investigate the plantation. She was determined to give voice to the silenced and uncover the truth behind the hauntings. Her initial research revealed harrowing accounts of the plantation's past, fueling her resolve to document and, if possible, alleviate the spirit's suffering. Rachel's empathy for the victims and her relentless pursuit of truth set the stage for a journey that would test her limits and reveal dark secrets buried beneath the surface. As she prepared for her investigation, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case would be unlike any other she had encountered, leading her deeper into the shadows of history and her own family's past. Rachel arrived at the plantation on a misty morning, the fog shrouding the decaying buildings in an eerie silence. The once grand estate now stood as a haunting reminder of its dark past, with ivy crawling up the cracked walls and ancient oaks casting long shadows over the grounds. The air was thick with a sense of sorrow, the whispers of history lingering like an unspoken secret. Her initial investigations began with interviews of the locals, many of whom recounted chilling stories passed down through generations. They spoke of ghostly figures seen at dusk, disembodied voices pleading for help, and an oppressive atmosphere that hung over the plantation. Armed with this knowledge, Rachel set up her paranormal investigation tools, including EMF detectors, voice recorders, and infrared cameras, in strategic locations around the property. One afternoon, while exploring a neglected section of the plantation grounds, Rachel noticed an area where the vegetation grew unusually sparse. Her curiosity piqued. She began to dig carefully. To her horror, she uncovered a mass grave, the skeletal remains of slaves who had been buried alive. The sight of the contorted skeletons, their final moments of agony etched into the earth, sent a cold shiver down her spine. Rachel's shock was palpable, her heart heavy with the weight of the atrocity she had uncovered. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the magnitude of the suffering that had occurred here. The emotional impact was overwhelming, but it strengthened her resolve to uncover the truth and bring peace to the tormented souls. She documented the site meticulously, knowing that this discovery was a crucial piece in the puzzle of the plantation's haunting. After uncovering the mass grave, Rachel's nights were plagued by suffocating visions. She dreamt of being buried alive, the weight of the soil pressing down on her chest, making it impossible to breathe. In her dreams, she heard the ghostly pleas for help, the voices of the buried slaves crying out in desperation. The visions were so vivid that she woke up gasping for air, her body drenched in sweat and her heart racing. During her waking hours, the hauntings intensified. Tools she had carefully placed began to move on their own, and her EMF detectors went wild, the readings off the charts. She heard whispers in the wind, faint but unmistakable, calling her name and begging for release. The oppressive atmosphere of the plantation grew heavier with each passing day, as if the very air was charged with the spirit's growing unrest. Rachel's struggle to maintain her composure was evident. She documented every occurrence, trying to stay objective, but the constant barrage of supernatural events wore her down. Lights flickered unpredictably, shadows darted across her peripheral vision, and cold spots followed her wherever she went. Her voice recorders captured eerie, disembodied voices, repeating phrases like, "Help us," and "Free us." Despite her fear, Rachel's dedication to the investigation remained unwavering. She knew she was on the verge of uncovering something significant, but the toll on her psyche was immense. Each night, the suffocating visions grew stronger, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. The spirit's anger was palpable, and Rachel felt the weight of their suffering bearing down on her, pushing her to continue her search for the truth while struggling to keep her sanity intact. Driven by the relentless hauntings and a need to understand her connection to the plantation, Rachel delved into her own family history. She spent countless hours in libraries and archives, poring over old documents, family records, and historical accounts. One fateful afternoon, she uncovered a journal belonging to her great-great-grandfather, a prominent figure in Charleston's past. Her blood ran cold as she read his confessions. He had been the plantation owner responsible for the horrific burial of the slaves. The journal described in chilling detail how he had orchestrated the punishment, believing it would serve as a deterrent to others. The cold, calculated cruelty of her ancestors' actions horrified Rachel, the weight of his sins bearing down on her. The spirit's torment suddenly made sense. They were seeking retribution not just against a faceless investigator, but against the bloodline that had wronged them. The hauntings intensified, their anger and desperation now directed at her with renewed fury. Rachel's distress grew as she grappled with the guilt and horror of her ancestral connection to the atrocity. She could barely sleep, the suffocating visions becoming more frequent and vivid, making her feel as if she were experiencing the buried slave's torment firsthand. Rachel's every attempt to apologize or seek forgiveness from the spirits seemed futile. Objects flew across rooms, her equipment malfunctioned, and the air grew colder, filled with an ever-present sense of foreboding. She felt trapped by the past, her ancestors' sins staining her own soul. The pressure mounted, her determination to make amends clashing with the overwhelming fear that she would never escape the spirit's wrath. Desperation clawed at her sanity, each step forward feeling like a descent deeper into the abyss of her family's dark legacy. As the spirit's torment reached its peak, Rachel found herself drawn inexorably to the plantation's graveyard. Ghostly whispers filled the air, calling her name, pleading for justice. She followed the disembodied voices, her flashlight flickering in the darkness, casting long, eerie shadows on the overgrown path. The visions of the buried slaves grew more vivid, their spectral forms appearing before her, their eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and anger. In the center of the graveyard, the earth began to tremble. Rachel's heart pounded as the ground beneath her feet started to crack and shift. She tried to step back, but it was too late. The soil gave way, and she was pulled into the yawning chasm. The descent was swift and terrifying, the cold, damp earth enveloping her as she tumbled into the darkness. Rachel landed in the mass grave, surrounded by the skeletal remains of the slaves. The walls of the pit seemed to close in, the weight of the soil pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The whispers grew louder, now a cacophony of tormented voices echoing around her. She could see the spectral forms of the slaves, their faces contorted in eternal anguish, their eyes burning with a desire for retribution. In her final moments, Rachel realized the full extent of her bloodline's sins and the spirit's demand for justice. She was doomed to share their fate, trapped underground, suffocating in the same way they had. The cold earth pressed tighter, the darkness absolute, as the spirit's whispers became her only companions. Her screams went unheard, her pleas for mercy lost in the void. Rachel's fate was sealed, eternally bound to the souls she had sought to understand, a chilling retribution for her ancestors' cruelty. The graveyard fell silent once more, the spirits finally appeased, leaving the plantation in an eerie stillness, the weight of its dark history buried beneath the soil.